Hey guys, so check this out. I came across this website called 100 Days CSS Challenge, and it was created by someone called Matthias Martin. And he basically created this website to challenge himself to get better at HTML and CSS over 100 consecutive days, right? By taking on a different challenge every single day. So, I thought I'd take a look at this website and see what the challenges were. On day one, you've got this text that says 100 Days CSS Challenge, and it's not that bad, right? You've got this text over here, which probably depends on a certain font family. And I guess a challenging bit would be to create this background gradient and also to construct this 100 with a few divs that are maybe absolutely positioned and rotated a bit, because this isn't actually text. You can't actually select this, right? But anyways, it seems pretty doable. And then we come to day 2 over here, and we've sort of got this hamburger menu icon. And if you click on it, it sort of has this keyframe animation. Nothing too crazy so far. It looks pretty good, pretty doable, right? But then I scroll down to day 3, and I mean, like, what the heck is this? First of all, like, how do you even create a pyramid like this with CSS? I have absolutely no idea. And on top of that, look at the sun. It moves across the sky while following this arc, and it also like casts a shadow on the surface of the pyramid and also on the sand, right? And look at how trippy this shadow is. Like, not only does it move across the sand, but it also grows and shrinks in size as it moves. Honestly, when I saw this, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of hurt my ego a bit because, I've got around 5 years of experience and I consider myself pretty okay at CSS. But when I saw this, I had absolutely no idea how to approach this, which is why for this video, I think I'm gonna challenge myself to try and build this exact animation and see how it goes, see what I learned. So yeah, like without further ado, let's jump right into it.
So for this coding challenge, I'm just gonna be using CodePen because it's going to be a lot easier for me to share the code with you guys at the end of this video. So to start off, I'm just going to create a new pen and title it The Pyramid. I'm also going to collapse the JavaScript editor because we won't be needing it at all for the CSS challenge. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create the gray background and the circular frame that we saw earlier on. And I'm going to do that by defining a div and giving it an ID of container. And this is going to be for the gray background. And I'm also going to define a child div within that and give it an ID of frame for our circular frame. The next thing I want to do is to center our container, and I'm just going to do that by using flexbox on the HTML body. So the way you do that is to just set a display property of flex and set both the justify content and align item properties to center. Okay, now I can start building out our container, and to do that, I'm just going to maybe try a width and height of 300 pixels and set the background color by grabbing this gray color using my color pick Chrome extension. So it's looking a bit small to me, so let me go ahead and update the width and height to maybe 350 pixels. That looks better for now. It fits the screen size, so I'm just gonna go ahead with that. Okay, from here, before I actually start writing any CSS for the circular frame, I need to basically do the same thing I did for the body and define the container to be a flex container that centers its children. I'm just gonna write the exact same CSS we had for the body, and now I'm ready to start writing CSS for our frame. So let me just go ahead and try a width and height of 50%, and the background color, I'll just set it to white for now. And here comes the first interesting part in my opinion. So normally what I'm used to doing to make a div into a circle is to just set a border radius on it of about 50%. And by doing that, you can sort of see that the frame becomes circular in shape. But I think there's going to be a problem here because from memory, when you use a border radius of 50%, it basically won't apply to any children of frames. So I can quickly test that out by creating another div and just giving it some example ID. Let me just call that out of bounds. And if I go ahead and write some CSS for this div, maybe give it a width and height of 100% of the parent, which is going to be the width and height of frame, and maybe give it a different background color. Oh, something is wrong over here. Just a silly issue where I forgot to add colons after width and height. But you can see from this that even though the parent which is frame, has a border radius of 50%, it's not actually applying it to any of its children. And in this case, that's the out of bounds div. So I'm going to need a different way to actually create a circular div that applies to all the children within it. So after digging around online for a bit, I came across this CSS clip path property. So it looks like you can use clip path to define a circle, and everything that falls outside that circle is basically going to be clipped out of view. So let me go ahead and try that by changing this border radius to a clip path, and I'll set it to a circle of 50% like they had in that example over there. Okay, and by doing this, you can see now that the child div also sort of follows the parent and is circular in shape, which is exactly what we want for this challenge. So now that I know that I've set up the circular shape of the frame div correctly, I can just go ahead and get rid of that example div that I created because I'm not going to be needing it. I'm also just going to make this circle a bit bigger and maybe set it to 60%. Yeah, I think that looks about right. Okay, so now that I've got the frame in place, the next thing I can start working on is the sky. So to do that, I'm just going to define a child div within frame and give it an ID of sky. And I'm going to set a display property of absolute on it. And I remember from my CSS learning days that whenever you set a display property of absolute, you need to have a parent set to relative as well. I might not be 100% correct on this, but I have a feeling that I need to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is to just set a width of 100% because I want it to be as wide as frame. And I'm gonna maybe give it a height of 60%. And for the background color, I'm just gonna grab that blue color from the original CSS challenge website by using my color pick tool. I'm gonna paste the hex color that I just grabbed over here, and we should see a blue sky. Okay, perfect. So sky's looking pretty good, but it just looks a bit short to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and increase the height a bit to maybe 65%, and yeah, that's looking close enough to me. Cool. So now that we've actually got the sky, we can move on to creating the next element, which is the sand. So to create the sand, I'm gonna define another div element, which is gonna be another child of frame and a sibling of sky, and I'm gonna give it an ID of sand. And for the CSS, I'm gonna set a display property of absolute again, give it a width of 100% and a height of 35%, which is 100 minus 65%. I also want the sand to sort of render below the sky, so I'm gonna have to use the top property to push it down by 65%, which is the height of the sky. And for the background color, I'm again gonna use my color pick tool and grab the color from the 100dayscss.com website. Okay, and after pasting in the hex color code, you can see that the sand is looking pretty good, which means that we're ready to move on to actually building out the pyramid, which I think is going to be a little bit more tricky. So off the top of my head, I'm actually not sure how I'm going to go about building this pyramid, because to me it looks like this pyramid is built out of two triangles, right? Which are the two different sides that you see over here. And the thing that's tripping me up is the fact that each of these sides don't seem to be, an isosceles or equilateral triangle. They seem to be triangles where each of their sides is of a different length. And the only way to draw triangles that I know is to just create a div and give it a width and height of 0, and maybe give it a border top or a border bottom, and give that border a certain thickness. So I've actually found this code pen which demonstrates exactly this, but you can see at the end of this animation what you're left with is basically, I don't know, an isosceles or an equilateral triangle, which isn't going to help us build those two sides from the original pyramid animation. So after digging around for a bit, I came across the clip path property again, but this time, instead of using a circle, it turns out that there's something known as a polygon. The documentation says that the polygon property is used to draw a polygon by providing one or more pairs of coordinates, each of which represents a vertex of the shape. And I think that by giving it 3 coordinates, we can sort of get a triangle to show up, and this triangle doesn't need to be equilateral or isosceles in shape, which seems like it's exactly what I'm after. So let me go ahead and try it out by defining another div, and I'm going to give it an ID of side 1 to represent the left side of the pyramid. I'll also give it a display of absolute, a width of 100%, and a height of 65%, and that's just to overlay it on top of the sky. So what I'm thinking is it's going to be overlaid on top of the sky, and then I'm going to use the clip path with the polygon property and cut out that side of the triangle. So let me actually see if this side has been correctly overlaid onto the sky, and if I set the background to white, we do not see this div at all. Okay, so after doing a bit of debugging, it turns out that I made a very silly mistake, which is I used display absolute instead of position absolute to define the absolute positioning of the divs, and setting display to absolute isn't valid CSS, so it didn't actually do anything. And it turns out that I also need to use position relative on the frame as well instead of display relative. But after doing that, you can see that the div representing the first side of the triangle has overlaid itself perfectly on top of the sky, and from there I can start defining a polygon clip path. I'm just going to try out some coordinates to see if I can get that shape to show up. Okay, that's definitely not positioned correctly. Okay, cool. After tweaking the coordinates within the polygon a bit, I think I've got something which looks pretty similar to the first side of our pyramid. So I'm going to leave that side as it is for now and start working on the second side of the pyramid to see if I can give it that pyramid look. Okay, so to create the second side, I'm basically going to do pretty much the same thing, which is create another div, give it an ID that's different, and maybe call it side 2. And I'm going to define pretty similar properties for this side as well. So I'll start off by giving it a position of absolute, a width of 100%, and a height of 65%. I'll also just give it a background color of white to make sure that it overlays itself on top of the sky. And from there, I'm just going to define another clip path using a polygon for my clip path. And I just need to work out what the coordinates are going to be for this side as well. Okay, and after fiddling around with it, you can see that we've sort of got an equilateral or isosceles looking triangle right now. And let me try and change maybe the opacity of this second side to see if we can distinguish it from the first side. Okay, cool. So after changing its opacity, you can see that the two sides are actually different and it's starting to look like a pyramid, right? I just need to figure out how to actually darken each of the sides by using a property other than opacity to sort of give it that shaded look. And after digging around a bit, I came across this post on Stack Overflow where somebody recommended using the filter property, and the value you give it is something called as brightness, and you just give it a percentage. So I'm not sure how well supported this would be across browsers, but honestly this is a CSS challenge, so I don't think it matters much. But let me go ahead and try it out. And if I just copy paste that filter property with a brightness of 85%, you can see that the second side is definitely looking darker, which is exactly what we want. Let me go ahead and just try dropping this percentage to maybe like 15%. And okay, cool. So it seems like with lower percentage values, the color basically approaches black, and with higher percentage values, it just approaches whatever background color you set on that element. And now that I actually compare my pyramid to the one on the 100 Days CSS challenge website, my pyramid is looking a bit tall for my liking. So I'm just going to tweak the height of the pyramid a bit to just get it to be a bit shorter. And okay, that looks much better to me. So I think we're ready to move on to the next part, which would be creating the shadow of the pyramid. Okay, so now that I've got both the sides of the pyramid drawn in and I know how to actually control the shadow that you see on each of the sides, the next thing I'm going to do is to sort of define this animation on both the sides so that we get this effect as the sun passes over it, where one of the sides darkens and the other side brightens. So to do that, I'm just going to use keyframe animations. And to use keyframe animations, I'm just going to add an animation property over here and give it a value of side 1 fade, which is the name of the keyframe animation that I need to define. I'll also give this animation a duration of 5 seconds and allow it to loop over and over forever. So that's what the infinite property does. I'll also use an ease in out Bezier curve to make sure that the animation sort of like ramps up and then ramps down at the end. The next thing I'll do is just define a keyframe with the same name that I defined above, and at different percentages of the animation, I'm just going to give it a different brightness. So maybe at 0%, the first side is going to have 100% brightness. At 50%, we can give it a 50% brightness, and then at 100%, we give it a 0% brightness. Let's just see what that looks like. I'm pretty sure it's going to be wrong, or it's not going to be what we're after. But yeah, you can see the shade of that side of the pyramid is changing, but it definitely doesn't look right when you compare it to the original animation. So I'm just going to tweak the values a bit over here, and it looks like it's not just about the brightness value you give it, but I also need to change at what point in the animation I want the brightness to transition. So I'll change this 50% to a 35%, and yeah, I think that looks pretty good, at least for the first side. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for the second side to see if this entire animation actually is correct. Okay, from here, I think I'm going to go ahead and define a keyframe animation for the second side to see if I can get it to look similar to the original animation. And the steps for this are basically going to look very similar. I'm going to define an animation property for the second side, give it a name of side 2 fade, a duration of 5 seconds, which is what I'm going to set as the total duration of all the animations for this challenge. I'm also going to give it the same infinite and ease in out properties. And from there, just create a keyframe at the bottom. And basically this time, just reverse the brightness values that I had set for the first side. And after doing that, something seems a bit off. I think the colors are maybe transitioning a bit too slowly. So let me just play around with the brightness values and the timing of this keyframe and see if I can get it to look similar to the original animation. Okay, so after playing around with these values for some time, I think I've got it to look pretty close to the original animation, and I'm happy with this for now. So I'm just going to leave it at that and move on to the next part, which is building out the shadow of the pyramid. So to build out this shadow, I think I have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to do that. I'm going to start off by creating another div and giving it a different ID. So this time I'll just call it shadow. And for the CSS of this div, I'm going to give it an absolute position, a width of 100%, a height of 35%, which is going to be the height of the sand. I'm going to move it down by 65%, which is the height of the sky, and give it a background color of black. Okay, so this is exactly what I wanted. I basically wanted this div to overlay itself on top of the sand, because that means from here I can use another clip path to carve out the shadow. So I'm going to do that by defining another clip path and just fiddling around with the coordinates that go in here. And you know, it's not perfect, but you can definitely see something that resembles a shadow. And if I just tweak the opacity a bit to make it a bit more transparent and set it to maybe 20%, you can see that the color of the shadow is pretty close to what they've got in the original animation. Okay, so from there, if I wanted to go ahead and animate this shadow, I can probably define another keyframe animation. I'll call it shadow move, give it a duration of 5 seconds and set the same infinite and ease in out properties on it. I'll then define the keyframe at the bottom. What I'm going to do to actually get this shadow to move is to define a keyframe animation, and for each of the percentage values, I'm just going to tweak that third coordinate at the bottom at different percentage values to sort of give it that effect of it moving or sweeping across the sand. So this definitely wasn't something that was easy to do. I actually spent 20 minutes just fiddling around with the animation percentages and the coordinate of that last point in the shadow. But you know, after fiddling around with it, I got something that I'm pretty happy with, and it looks something like this. Now, it's definitely not 100% match if you compare it to the original animation, but I think it's good enough. It's good enough for this challenge, which means that I can move on to the next part, which is building out the sun and sort of having it follow that arc in the sky. Okay, so drawing the sun is easy. You know, you just define a div and give it a border radius of like 50%. But what's actually tripping me up is animating the sun and getting it to follow that arc sort of path. Now, I had no idea how to do this, so I dug around online for a bit and initially thought that, you know, I could use the path property, because I know that CSS allows you to define a path where you can sort of give it coordinates. And I was wondering if there's a way to get the div to sort of follow that path. And after digging around for a bit, I came across this demo on on the MDN documentation website. And you can see over here what they've done is defined an offset path using some coordinate. And then what they do is in their keyframe animation, they actually change the offset value to get this div to move along that path. Initially, when I saw this, I thought this is exactly what I was after. But the thing that's tripping me up is these coordinates that actually go within the offset path. I was hoping that you could maybe pass in percentage values for the coordinates so that the path would be drawn relative to the parent container, but it doesn't seem like I can do that. I don't think it supports percentage values. And to be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure what coordinate system this path function or property even supports or follows. So I dug around online a bit more. And the other idea that I could think of was to use the transform origin property along with a rotation transformation. So rather than talking about it, let me just try out what I have in mind and walk you through it. So to start off, I'm going to define another div, but this div is not going to be for the sun. It's actually going to be for a container that the sun will be added into. So that means that I need to define a child for this sun container and give it an ID of sun, which will actually represent the sun in the animation. From there, I'm going to give this container an absolute position, a width of 100% and a height of 65%, and give it a background color of white because again, I just wanted to overlay itself on top of the sky. Something seems to be broken over here and it looks like I've got a typo in absolute. Okay, so after fixing that, you can see that this container has overlaid itself on top of the sky. The next thing I want to do is to actually draw the sun within this container. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a width and height of 35% and just grab the background color using my color pick tool from the original animation. And give it a border radius of 50%. Oh, and the issue here is that the width and height of sun container isn't really equal, so it's not actually a square. So if I were to use percentages like this for the sun, it's going to be an ellipse rather than a circle. I'm just going to fix that by changing it to pixel values, which is not ideal, but it's gonna have to do for now. And once I do that, I should have a sun being drawn, but I probably can't see it just because of the clip path that's being applied to the frame. So for now, let me just go ahead and comment that out. Okay, and after commenting it out, you can see that we've got a sun drawn within the container. The next thing I want to do is to position the sun at the bottom left corner of this container. And I can do that by just giving it a top of 100%, which should move it right down to the bottom left corner. And I'm also going to go ahead and grow this container in either direction by the diameter of the sun, which is 40 pixels. From there, I'm going to define a transform origin and set it to a value of bottom, which would set it to, the center bottom of sun container. And from there, to actually animate the sun, I'm going to rotate this container later on using a keyframe. But to just test out the idea, you can see over here that if I set a rotational property of 10 degrees, the sun sort of moves a bit, right? If I set it to 90 degrees, it rotates a bit more. And if I set it to 180 degrees, it sort of goes outside the frame again. But something seems wrong over here. And I think what's happening is I'm using like a transform property to rotate the container. But on line 70, I also use a transform property to translate it by -40 pixels. So what's likely happening is the rotate property is overriding the translate property. So to fix that, I'm just going to use a left of -40 pixels instead of translating it. And now you can sort of see if I change this rotational angle, it sort of follows this nice arc in the sky. Okay, so to actually go ahead and animate this, I can go ahead and define an animation called rotate sun, give it a duration of 5 seconds, give it the same infinite and ease in and out properties, and then go ahead and define a keyframe at the bottom of the CSS file. So for each of the percentage values, I'm just going to go ahead and change the rotational angle. And something seems to be wrong over here. Oh, and it turns out that it's just a really silly issue of me typing animate instead of animation. But once I change that, you can see that the sun is now rotating really nicely across the sky. So I'm just going to go ahead and tweak the keyframe values a bit until it looks sort of similar to the original animation. Now I'm pretty happy with it, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the white background color that I added to the sun container, as well as uncomment that flip path on frame, and again just tweak the values a bit more. Okay, cool. From there you can see that we've got this animation of the sun sort of moving across the sky, and at the same time it's syncing itself up pretty well with the shadow. So I'm going to leave the sun at that for now and move on to the next part of the challenge, which is just making everything fade in and out at the beginning and end of the animation. Okay, so getting the entire animation to fade in and out like what we can see on this website is, I think, going to be the easiest step in this entire challenge. So to do that, I'm just going to define an animation property on our frame. I'm going to call it fade frame, give it a duration of 5 seconds like everything else, and also set the infinite and ease in out properties on it. I'm then going to go ahead and define a keyframe at the bottom of our CSS file. Make sure I'm using the same fade frame name. And to actually control the fading, I'm going to change the opacity value of this frame. And you can already kind of see that the entire frame along with all the children within it is fading in and out now, and it's just a matter of tweaking the animation percentages as well as the opacity values to get it to look similar to the original animation. Okay, and after playing around with it for a while, you can see that the entire animation is fading in and out, and it looks pretty good to me. And if we've done everything correctly, I should be able to change the width and height of the container, and voila, like the entire animation should also change in size and also still work as expected. The only downside, I guess, is that I hard coded the value of the sun to be 40 pixels. So as this container grows or shrinks in size, the sun isn't going to change in size. I'm sure there's an easy fix for this, but honestly, I'm a bit too exhausted from this challenge and too lazy to fix it. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Cool. So if you guys want to actually play around with the CSS code for this, I've left a link in the description for this pen. But yeah, that's the entire challenge. Thanks for watching this far. If you made it till here, I'll see you guys in the next one.